Thank you, Milton. And thank you, everyone, for being here and for your patience at this time. It's going to be very difficult to just follow that very animated lecture and very interesting lecture from Nathan. I really have nothing to disclose, and other than the fact that you know what you're going to hear about, but just a few things that I want to put in perspective. Most of you, I don't know, how many physicians are here in the audience? Very good, so a good number of them. This is going to be a very skewed group in the sense that everyone is a proponent for telemedicine. That's a fact. That's why you're here. But we're going to review just very briefly about the business model of medicine, how it's being practiced for many, many years, and how it keeps being practiced essentially the same way. We're in the Silicon Valley, where historically there's full of innovators. At the same time, we're going to think about how a physician is seen as a successful physician, and how those two just do not match very well, and how it can be very difficult to innovate in the field of medicine, for that matter. And then the challenges and the opportunities that we can see in educating people into telehealth and telemedicine. And I was mentioning, Silicon Valley, San Francisco. Everyone says they're an innovator. There's lots of titles about that. But when it comes to healthcare, even at places like Stanford, we have to look at the reality. And we probably have the worst organized healthcare system in the developed world, for that matter. And it is a non-sustainable system. And this is like preaching to the core, because all of you guys, as I said, are proponents of new technologies and telemedicine. But this is something that, spending almost 20% of GDP, we really can't keep going on. If we think about like the history of medicine, I mean, this is a mural from a Mexican painter in Mexico City. Like for thousands of years, medicine hasn't changed much, in the sense that thousands of years ago we used very primitive instruments to do certain things. In the last 200 years probably, we've been using like modern surgery, for that matter, opening cavities, abdomen, thorax, etc. For the last 30 years we do everything with endoscopy, and so on, up to the point that we just don't use any incisions at all. But we have great technologies. We can take thousands of pictures with a pill camera, or we can do telepresence surgery, for that matter, robotic surgery, that in theory you could be in China and the patient can be, I don't know, in South America, or the other way around. But because of restrictions that the FDA has for certain valid reasons, we don't use, for that matter, and surgeon and patient have to be in the same room. We could do lots of things, as I mentioned before, by putting just a camera, a special device through the mouth, through another cavity, and just perform very sophisticated operations that before we needed to make big incisions, or we can just put a needle and just take care of those things. But if we stop a little bit and think about the business model that medicine has, for that matter, it is truly non-scalable. It is one-on-one, for that matter. And I could, a successful, professor, let's say at Stanford, someone young who comes out of like residency or out of fellowship, by then they have done probably 12, 14, 15 years of school, for that matter. And then they will take care of patients in their practice, and they're going to go to the operating room, let's say, and they could do no more than 5 cases a day, let's say. So the social impact is very limited, as you know. If we go to clinic, it's going to be maybe 25 patients, maybe 50 patients, maybe 100 patients if you don't give any quality of care, for that matter. But it's non-scalable. So with no question, using digital health, telemedicine, all those things, certainly it makes lots of sense. Just going to some economic numbers, for that matter, I am a digestive surgeon. I take care of obese people. It costs about $130,000. That's the bill that patients get, or the insurance company gets, from an operation that takes me 2 hours, and for patients to go home 2 days. This is something that we cannot mimic, for example, in places like India, where you could do open heart surgery for less than $1,000 because they have lots of resources, human resources, etc. So we do have a huge problem that we need to find a way how to take care of that. But we need to see exactly, other models where people have innovated, so we can actually mimic that and perhaps get to a solution. And going back to innovation, if you think about the cell phone, if you think about a number of different things, it has to be something very simple. It has to have economic sense, make sense to people, be easy to use, all those things, portable, etc. The same thing in medicine, for sure. And we know, all of us, we believe in telemedicine. That certainly that's a true innovation for that matter. But successful innovators in the world of business, for that matter, they are people who have failed not once, not twice, but like many times. And they persist and they persevere, and they're actually going to be very attractive to investors. If you say, well, I've had a number of different companies, I failed because of this and that, but now my company is going to do well. They have this profile that you can see. They're opportunistic, they're eccentric, they try to socialize with people, open-minded, open source, etc. Now, if we compare that with the model, how we create since from the get-go, like what we want to call a successful physician, is very different to that, in the sense that we have to be extreme. We have to have extreme prediction to risk. We cannot fail, for that matter. As a matter of fact, we get, I won't say punished, but we get highly criticized if something goes wrong, if we do something different than the norm, for that matter. And from day one, medical students, they're pretty much taught to be that way. So highly risk averse, we highly specialize, cost insensitive for many things. And when we do much of our research that we are passionate about, oftentimes we don't share those things until it's something that we have protected and it's highly public, and things that we just don't want other people to take advantage of. So can we truly bring telemedicine? I mean, are we the ones that we need to bring this to the masses, or we need to find different ways by means of entrepreneurs, by means of patients? Well, we need to find that out. But the medical school curriculum across medical schools, pretty much throughout the US and throughout the world for the most part, they have no rigid implementation of the art or of the practice of telemedicine in that curriculum, and only a few examples, as we will see, they have been implemented so far. The FDA, for example, when it comes to the use of digital health devices that many of these companies will have, wearable devices, devices that implement augmented reality, virtual reality, and a number of different things, they're not even included in the normal cycle that the FDA has. And until very recently, there was actually not a body within the FDA that would regulate these things. Recently, there was a paper published out of one of my mentors in Texas that they had reviewed over 100,000 digital health applications, and less than 1% of those were actually FDA approved. So this is certainly a big challenge. We hear from politicians, over and over again. This is certainly a big challenge, but of course we know big challenges take you to big opportunities. But we need to see if we can bring those to the masses of young physicians by taking care of educating them that well. And I mentioned some of the things that certainly promising technologies. We're here talking about telehealth today. And the reality, as I was pointing out, is very different. We have, this is the American Association of Medical Colleges. Those are the association that regulates pretty much the curriculum that medical students should have during their formation. And usually they predict that there's going to be a huge shortage of primary care physicians, for that matter, and at some point, especially notably for general surgeons, for that matter. And much of this could be improve dramatically with the use of telehealth. But if our medical students do not know that telehealth is something that it's adequate, that it's something that it's safe, that it's something that it should be implemented because it has economic value, then they're not going to implement it, in the years to come, for that matter. This is the medical school curriculum for those who are not very familiar with this, that we have at Stanford University, and it's usually pretty much the same that most U.S. schools have, in the sense that within the first 2 years is the classes are in classrooms like this, and they review basic things in anatomy, like anatomy, physiology, pathology, et cetera, and then by disease component within those first 2 years. And then after that, they go into what is called elective rotations. But in no place there is truly a rigid implementation of new technologies that we could use in teaching them how to do this. Nowadays we have things that we're implementing like what is called the flipped classroom, where they don't really have to go to a classroom all the time. They get a small class and they do lots of things online at home or wherever they want. But even though all of our medical students are what we call digital natives, they were born with internet and with all this ICTs, information and communication technologies, they are not being allowed to implement those in the daily care or practice. That is just when people go through medical school. When you graduate and then you want to practice medicine, here in the US, in order for you to practice medicine, you must get specialized for that matter. If it's primary care physician or family physician, if it's surgeon, if it's anesthesia, whatever that may be, you have to go through further years of training. And those are regulated by what we call as ACGME, which is the Council for Graduate Medical Education. And usually they have all this, what they call core competencies, that they have to make sure that everything they do has to fit at least in one of those. If you go and look at their manuals and books that they have at length of all the details that they have to cover through those years of practice before they go into on their own, in no single space there's telehealth or telemedicine mentioned. Okay, which is it's really crazy. So this is something that needs to be identified and needs to be fixed in order for all these new companies to actually succeed at some point. Now, there's been recently a commission for what is called the Future of Graduate Medical Education, where just with deans of medical school, they review all these things. And that, in addition to an initiative that the American Medical Association has to include new technologies in the teaching of medicine, hopefully things could change. This is from our former dean at Stanford School, that it's not just adding more people, more doctors, what is going to help things solve the problem. You certainly need to get with the times of life, for that matter. It's like I remember as I was getting trained, lots of my old doctors, they would say, I do not believe on CAT scans, I do not believe in in ultrasounds and all these new technologies, because you have to evaluate the patient with your hands, with your questionnaire, all those things. And of course that's ridiculous, and that has proven to change. The same thing I hear over and over again from our administrators. You cannot send text messages with the name of patients and with their condition and where they are and how it's going. And every single day, hundreds of severe HIPAA violations are taking place in all the hospitals throughout the US. I mean, that's a fact. And no one talks about it, but it's a fact. So we need to find ways how we can actually change this thing. I mentioned that the American Medical Association has identified this as a gap. They actually have invested some money and human resources, at least in 32 leading medical schools throughout the US, to actually say, well, we will give you some resources, some money, if you come up with innovative programs for that. And those innovative programs could involve telemedicine, they could involve what is called design thinking, they could involve AI, whatever that may be, so they can improve this. And some of the ones that my digital health fellow helped me highlight, for that matter, would include these ones from the University of Hawaii, University of Arizona, and University of North Dakota, where I did some of my training, that are truly implementing, at least in a little bit, the use of telemedicine during the medical school, for good or bad, because they have the need probably in a subset of patients, but at least their medical students are being exposed to that. So they certainly will become more familiar with this. There's some other places, Texas, Carolina, that they also have some of these places. We heard this morning from University of California. We also have UC San Diego. There's a major investment in the so-called the Center of Future Medicine, that they're certainly investing some money for telemedicine, but those are usually very isolated examples that we will see throughout the U.S. And some of the places are coming up with what is called digital health center. The reality of things, for example, at Stanford, we have that, which is great. I mean, we have to have something being here in Silicon Valley, but most of the people who are working on initiatives like that, they're working on silos. And students, only those who are highly motivated, they're going to be involved in this sort of technology. So we need to push through, like, if it's government, if it's medical boards, if it's medical schools, etc., that we would have to implement across the board the implementation of ICTs in medicine. A few years ago, just to tell you about the experience that we have had at Stanford, we created what is a massive open online course. 5 years ago, the provost of online education came up with some seed grants that they said, well, we're going to give it to, out of the 7 schools at Stanford, we're going to give some money to the people who come up with an innovative project. We actually got one of those to teach mobile health and telemedicine. And we had at least 3 versions of that class that it was free. It was for everyone to take online. And we have students from nearly all over the world. We have up to 20,000 students. Massive open online courses are usually heavily criticized because people just don't finish them. They just sign up for that. But we actually had a 30% completion rate. And the sort of ideas that you get, it's very interesting because it's a mix of people who are in healthcare, and they can be medical students, they can be doctors, they can be entrepreneurs, they can be engineers, they could be from many different backgrounds, but the mix of ideas was certainly great. So what we saw at that point was that it was a great opportunity for everyone, and that MOOC, or that massive open online course, could be pretty much initiated by anyone. It doesn't have to be the medical school industry, for that matter. But it's, with no question, a great source for entrepreneurs, and a great way how to scale healthcare, as you can imagine. Now, Milton was just mentioning a little bit about this. We actually, it's great for me because I can take the credit, but until now we did not have a formal a class in a medical school for telemedicine, at Stanford, which is a little almost crazy. But we're implementing one, and we have lots of the, some of the professors who have lectured today, or who will lecture within the next few days, come to our class of medical students so they can share with them about some of the opportunities, the challenges that we actually have, the failures and the successes that you can have, so we can shape the minds of young people, before they get that mindset of risk aversion and a very different mindset that probably old-fashioned physicians may have before there were ICTs like the ones we have. At the same time, I do lots of global work. I work with a university in Dubai, which is the Mohammed bin Rashid University of Health Sciences, and we have had, at least this is the second year, we're going to be teaching what is called innovation, entrepreneurship, and digital health in medicine. And this is a progressive study that we're going to be studying medical students from year 1 up to year 7 when they graduate. In addition to that, we have created what is called the AID Lab, which stands for Emerging Innovative Global Health Technologies. And this has given us some extra support from the university and from other places, because now we're trying to implement the use of low-cost telemedicine with the use of drones. We get a grant to actually implement this in the north of Mexico. And it's a multi-university group. This is from some people at Stanford, some people at University of Geneva, and some people in Mexico. And basically just to bring, just for low acuity of care, but some things that we can use with the platform software that VSee has, with simple things like a Google phone, a Pixel phone, a basic low-cost telemedicine kit, and we're actually flying it. We have had quite a few flights in a single-engine drone where we can get to remote locations in Mexico where they could still there be connectivity. We have a huge tragedy yesterday with a big earthquake. This is not the type of drone that you would use for that, but certainly it's a great example that it's just, if you bring it to the mind of like medical students and other students of health sciences, you get them very, very interested in actually implementing telemedicine for that during their education. And this has been a great collaboration, because we can bring this low-cost, low-tech medical kit, telemedicine kit, to a remote location where actually people can use it. The same type of example people are using in Africa, but mainly with things like blood or some medical supplies. This is actually a bit more inventive, we want to say, because we're implementing actually telemedicine for that matter. We do have some failures. And it happens, so you have to learn from that, but at least it's not that bad. So anyway, we certainly will have we do have lots of challenges, but I think, and I applaud Milton initiative and invite to help me share some of the work that we have done over the years with education in telehealth. There will always be challenges, if it's technological, if it's economic, everything. But the biggest one we have across the board with any sort of innovative technology is going to be with the mindset of physicians. So I really believe, I'm a firm believer that if we, like since day one, you mold their mindset, you tell them that this is something that is good, and them being digital natives, certainly you can make this to a reality. Creating open source models for many of these things in medical education, I think it's a great success. Because it invites people from all over the world who are actually truly invested in doing things like this. I think you could share with me the fact that perhaps telemedicine will be driven to the masses, not just by providers or entrepreneurs, but with no question by patients, because those are the best advocates for their health, and they're going to be the ones pushing for this. And certainly we have the responsibility to actually bring it to education. Having said that, I would like to thank all of you for your attention, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for your talk. My question is, could you speak a little bit about, I guess, like when you think most medical schools will basically kind of like change from the old way they've been doing it, let's say in the last 10 years, to the way that you would want to see it? Like, let's say, is it going to take 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, in your opinion?
Well, I think, changes go slow in academia, but I think within the next 5-10 years it should happen because of the needs of a different society that we have. I mean, there's no way that you can just, obstruct the sun with a finger. You really have to pay attention to what everyone talks about. And more, even without noticing, people are implementing telemedicine in their education. There's no question about it. Yes?
I'm curious, do you see any, first of all, thank you for talking. Do you see any role for telehealth and in education about telehealth and CMEs, and if so, how would that work? With no question, I think any sort of education at any level is going to be great. I think I'm somewhat cynical when it comes to CMEs. I mean, it's a business, but I think it's a needed business. In many ways, I think it's a great opportunity because it actually, it's interesting. It's something that people would find that most people think that they know what they need to know about telemedicine and technology because they have a phone and they can use, whatever, WhatsApp or Skype or anything. But they don't really know what really matters. I think there's great opportunities for that. Having said that, CME in general, I just see it as a business, but that's okay. But great opportunity, let's put it that way. Yes?
Thank you for the talk. My question is regarding the use of cell phones. In 21st century, we are even managing our bank accounts and all sensitive information on our cell phones. But I've been observing too much resistance from the healthcare organizations for the use of mobile devices. What's your take on that?
I think it's crazy. I think it is going to happen no matter what because everyone uses it. I think I think restrictions are needed, and especially we listened to the lecture from Nathan. Any lawyer is going to tell you that you have to just regulate things. But at the same time, the innovation, sometimes you really can't stop that. I mean, there's many things that we practice in medicine that I can tell you that there was really no science behind that. Like with science, we're scientists and we think that anything has to be randomized, double-blinded, multicentric, type 1 evidence before it can be used. And it's going to be impossible for us to have that information because the way that technology goes is so fast. But we at least have to do some of that. But I think it's going to happen regardless with the use of cell phones and many other things.
Kind of tacking on to that question, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on, you mentioned there needs to, of course, when it comes to cell phones and things like that, there should be some restrictions in place. But at the same time, especially here in the United States, there are some very restrictive laws that are actually restricting innovation in this field, including things like HIPAA, which is a law that was written in 1993 and it's very internet unfriendly. And I'm just curious if you think these types of things might be a factor that make the United States fall behind compared to other countries on these fields.
Well, of course. I mean, there's great innovation here, okay? But in medicine, at least in medicine, we're some of the last adopters of innovation. It comes from here, it gets tested everywhere, it gets utilized everywhere, and we're the last ones to use it. And it's sad, but it's a fact. I think we just, as I said, need to just be more competitive. And entrepreneurs are very smart, successful entrepreneurs are very smart, and you need to come up with innovative business models that can find a loophole for those things. That's what I see. I mean, that's a fact. I just think, you know, we need to invest in educating new generations, so later on they're not the one, you know, they find ways how we can actually use technology in the best way possible.
Yep, so I'm from Australia. I'm a technology advisor for the Australian Physio Association. The government in Australia has launched a cloud-based electronic health record for all Australians. So it's based in a cloud called My Health Record. So basically, something like that has pushed all providers to become digital. Is anything like that going to happen here, or it's...
I doubt it. I mean, we have similar things, but they're usually most, and more people can you know, tell you about it, but commercial-based, what is called EMRs, electronic medical records, or you know, personal health records. I don't think it's going to be something that is going to be pushed, other than the VA, which is a government agency, can do something like that. Otherwise.
Yep. And the other question I have is, what's happening here with like physical therapists? Is it on the same? Is that the same rate as medicine, or is it slower, or do they move around at the same pace of adoption?
Well, that's going to be probably for a different lecture, because that's not going to be my main expertise. But I can tell you the same way that Nathan was saying, in the sense that it depends how you frame it, how you know, if you own it or not. That has to be the act of medicine or not.
Education where there might be a mandate for telemedicine and a mandate to teach doctors nutrition?
I believe so. There's no question, because at some point, you know, things are going to happen that there are going to be some more lawsuits or events or successes. I mean, we hate to talk about bad things, but there are also successes. And I think people will be teaching more about it, and at some point it will be implemented in the curriculum. Even in a small little way, but it has to be. So if we identify that, you know, those who are involved with teaching, we should leverage on that and just, you know, bring it to a reality. Very good. And, you know, you can always stop me and we can talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Homero.